Yes.
Okay.
Hello, guys. Can you hear me? I think that now it's working. It's working on YouTube. So let me update the link and put on X, because I think that we have a problem with the Riverside connection, because it's not streaming on X, but it's doing on YouTube. So finally, people is happy. So let me post this again on YouTube. So on X, let me do the here. The Smart Web Community. Yes, I posted on the community. I think that we are live. People, yes, it's people is there. Sorry for making you wait, guys, because I don't know what happened with the technical connection. The first thing was a problem with the time zone, because I am not in Hong Kong. I'm in Bangkok, so it's 1 hour behind Hong Kong. So, but now we are okay and we are live. Let's start. We are live. This is the Bitcoin Libertarian. Our guest today is Andrew Webley, CEO of the Smarter Web Company, the UK leading public traded Bitcoin treasury company. Andrew has been at the forefront of bringing corporate Bitcoin adoption to the UK markets. Under his leadership, Smarter Web has built one of the largest Bitcoin holdings among public corporates in the region, currently around 2,695 Bitcoin. Uplisted to the London Stock Exchange main market, achieved FTSE index inclusion, acquired profitable agencies like Squarebit, and maintained a disciplined accumulation strategy even through market volatility. We are recording this amid some notable Bitcoin price movements. Today, Bitcoin is around 68K after recent dips tied to geopolitical tensions and broader market uncertainty, yet the long-term case for Bitcoin as digital capital remains stronger than ever. We will also touch on the exciting Bitcoin Treasuries and Conference in the UK happening on May 29 in Bristol, Andrew's home turf and Smarter Web birthplace. Andrew, welcome.
Thank you. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you again. And again, sorry for the making you wait. Sorry for making all the audience wait. But finally, we are here. We are live to go on a deep conversation about what is going on the Smarter Web Company world and in the Bitcoin world. So, since we spoke last time, a Smarter Web Company has been listed on the London Stock Exchange, has been incorporated in the FTSE, don't remember the name again, FTSE index, and all the things. I saw that you are buying Bitcoin. So make a recap of the last months since we spoke last time.
Yeah, so it's been a busy 2 months, February and March. So at the start of February, we uplisted to the main market of the London Stock Exchange. That's structurally significant. It gives us access to much greater amounts of capital. Obviously, when market conditions improve a little bit. The first big thing that people can see from that is we then announced that we had been admitted to the FTSE index series, which took effect at the close of the market on Friday, the start of the market today. So now we're part of the FTSE All Share, the FTSE Small Cap Index as well. That's really, really important, because that means that we get passive flows of capital now. So people can see that there was a trade for about £1 million that went through at the close of play on Friday, and I'm really interested to see how that materializes in terms of our shareholder register. So that was a good thing. We've also had a couple of Bitcoin buys. We've done something else that's increased our Bitcoin yield quarter to date, which was a small warrant buyback that we announced in the last couple of weeks. And then we've also announced some team changes. So our CFO resigned last week. We announced that to the market on Friday. And then Jamie joined our team And we announced that this morning, coming into the team as the head of capital markets. So yeah, there's been a lot going on.
How has impacted in the company having been listed at the London Stock Exchange main panel and also having accepted in the FTSE index?
Yeah, so I think it's too early to say what the implication of being in the indexes is. I think most people, including myself, believe that it's a positive thing for the company. I don't think even someone that doesn't like us could say it's a negative thing. But I think it's too early to say. One of the things that's fairly clear to me at the moment is that when you're a company that's got a significant balance sheet built on Bitcoin, you know, you come in and out of favor as Bitcoin comes in and out of favor. So I think that's something that I'm watching very, very closely at the moment. I think it's important for everyone to realize that, you know, we all look at Bitcoin and we think Bitcoin's the very best asset in the world. But I think everyone needs to look at Bitcoin in relation to everything else that's going on in the world right now. So, you know, it's pretty uncertain at the moment. And I think if we look at Bitcoin, how strong Bitcoin is. So as we're talking today, gold and silver are down another 5%. I think silver was down almost 10% earlier. Oil is barely up today. It has gone up a lot in the last couple of weeks, you know, with the conflict that's happening in the Middle East. But if you look at, you know, the wider macro picture, and then you look back at Bitcoin, Bitcoin's looking pretty solid at the moment. So I think that's important for everyone to think, you know, so yes, our company's, you know, the biggest by far in the UK in terms of its Bitcoin treasury. But that does mean to say that, you know, people perceive our value in the context of Bitcoin, but then our investors should look at the wider macro picture and look at that as well. You know, a lot of the conversations that we're having at the moment, people love what we're doing, and I'm talking more on the institutional side of things than the retail side of things, who are incredibly supportive. But I think to see significant flows come into the sector in terms of the active money, not the passive money, I think we need to see a Bitcoin that's starting to head back up again, and I'm of the opinion that that's going to be any day.
Yes, when we were talking about this a couple of weeks ago, Bitcoin seems to be recovering. We were over 70K. It was strong support around 70K, then went up to 76, and then everything fall down. We are living through a very huge uncertainty times. How is the Smarter Web company in particular and all the Bitcoin treasury company industry dealing with this uncertainty that we are living day by day?
Yeah, I think there's lots of different ways that different companies are responding to, you know, what looks like a bear market in terms of Bitcoin treasuries that's, you know, been going on for, dependent on how you slice it up, 9 months, 6 months. What we're doing is we're pushing forward with absolutely everything. We believe that the structural makeup of the company is what will make us grow significantly over time, and especially when the market improves. But I think different companies are looking at that in different ways. You know, some companies are doing nothing. You know, I'm not trying to make any or name any companies here. I'm just talking of my perception of the market as a Bitcoin treasury investor. So some companies are doing nothing. Other companies are trying to do different types of funding strategies. You know, we've got a very, very clear strategy in terms of where we're heading, what we think the right capital structure is. And that's what we're pursuing. So I've said to people time and time again that, you know, I'll only take money in terms of new capital if I think it's structured correctly. And that's my intention, you know. I think we've got the model right, but of course I would say that, you know, if you spoke to any other CEO, they'd probably, or hopefully, say that they think they've got the model right. I think what you need to be as a Bitcoin treasury company is, I think you need to get scale. But then I also think that you need to get scale with the right structure. And I think the path forward for us in terms of, you know, a relatively clean capital structure is the right approach. I think that's what our existing investors want, and I think the new investors that we're talking to, you know, they don't want complicated capital structures. So yeah, that's where we're going, and I think the future's looking pretty encouraging.
So we saw that in the middle of this Bitcoin crash, I don't like to call it a bear market. I call it a correction. Bitcoin is in a bull market since 2009, and now we are in a correction. In the middle of this correction, we saw many companies like Strategy buying more Bitcoin. I just saw on LinkedIn that the Capital B has acquired, I think, 33 Bitcoin, something like that.
44.
Do you see 44? Okay, so I didn't say 44 because in Chinese it's bad luck saying the 4. So, but anyway, no, it's 44. Great, more than what I was checking. And do you see that the industry is probably taking, I think not, I don't want to say the word advantage, but that now they see this uncertainty, Bitcoin going down, as a huge opportunity to speed up the accumulation of Bitcoin?
I think what you have to do is, you know, as a Bitcoin treasury company, you obviously want to buy Bitcoin. To buy Bitcoin, you need capital. Capital can come in different shapes and forms. You know, if we look at Capital B, which I hold shares in Capital B, they announced last week a couple of things, and one of those things was an option where they sold a €3 million option in their stock to, I believe it was 2 investors, and that produced some capital. And then they announced today 44 Bitcoin, which was, I think, €2.9 million, i.e., you know, the capital, which looks like it came from that. You know, in terms of Bitcoin, you've got other companies that are doing different things, you know, different, whether it's straight equity, equity with warrants, convertibles, acquisitions, all these different things. But what any Bitcoin company, you know, ours or any of these other great companies globally need to do is they need to raise capital to then buy Bitcoin. There are other things that you can do, of course, like, you know, roughly a week ago, we announced the results of this voluntary buyback that we did, where what we did is we managed to reduce the shares in issue, the fully diluted shares in issue, by approximately 0.75%. And we took on approximately 0.4% of our balance sheet value as debt, short-term debt, to do that. So you can introduce leverage into the model. If we look at the leader, and I had lots of conversations with Michael Saylor and others when I was in Vegas a couple of weeks ago at Strategy World. You know, what they're doing is they're focusing on their common equity and one of their preferred instruments, which is called Stretch, which is a non-convertible perpetual preference share that pays approximately 12% yield, but you don't get any upside, you know, from the future growth or the future expected growth of the balance sheet that goes to the common shareholders. To me, that looks like the very, very best way of doing these things. But clearly, that sort of model is something that not everyone can do, whether it's regulations or size or other things. So we've got a very clear plan of what we think the right approach is for a Bitcoin treasury company, because what you need is you need the model to work in all different market conditions. So we've all seen, you know, if we go back to last year, what you can do in a very, very buoyant market where there's lots of demand for Bitcoin and Bitcoin treasury companies. We've managed to achieve a reasonable amount in this quarter for almost a flat Bitcoin yield growth, you know, because we've done things like the uplisting to the London Stock Exchange. We've acquired another business that's a profitable business that generates, you know, reasonable amounts of revenue, massively increasing the revenue in our operating business as a whole. So there's things that you can do, but it's for every CEO and board to decide what's the right thing for them in their market where they work. You know, and I think people will see over the coming months when we can tell them a lot more about where we have plans that we haven't yet talked about in any massive amounts of detail, why we think that we've got the right model. going back to strategy for a moment, let's simplify what they're doing. In my mind, they've got a very volatile stock that produces a massive growth opportunity, which I personally hold as well. And then they've got, forgetting all the other preferreds, they've got one preferred that doesn't offer investors any growth opportunity, but offers them no volatility or very little volatility, and a yield, a double-digit yield that beats pretty much anything. It beats anything in the UK at the moment. It would beat it even better if you didn't have the withholding tax as well. But obviously, you'd need to be a UK listed security to do that. To me, that seems very, very sensible. It's the best type of debt, leverage, whatever you want to call it, in the model. And I think that if anyone in the UK was able to do such a model, I think that would be particularly successful. And until then, we've been working with some pretty big financial institutions that just need Bitcoin to start looking like it's on its way back up again. And as I say, I think we're almost there at the moment. Clearly, I don't know exactly what that moment's going to be, whether it's this afternoon, next week, tomorrow, a month, it could be 6 months. I doubt it, but it could be. And the reason why I doubt it is if you look at the strength of Bitcoin relative to other asset classes in the world, we've all seen gold massively come off. I think silver is 50% the value of its recent high. Oil isn't performing particularly well when you think of, the terrible conflict that we've got in the world. Nasdaq's not doing particularly great right now. So if we look at Bitcoin in the context of all of those wider things, and then we think about what is the optimum structure for a Bitcoin treasury company, I think the future is looking incredibly exciting for the Smarter Web company and its shareholders.
Excellent. Well, talking about the shareholders, I saw many of them on the YouTube live stream. So please leave a comment, give us a like so we can reach more people. And any question that you want to ask, please drop in the comments. So Andrew will answer to that. I want to, before moving forward to the strategy wall and all the things that I want to ask, you mentioned the voluntary pre-IPO warrant buyback. How do these tools help increase Bitcoin per share over time, especially when navigating short-term market noise?
Yeah, so when we listed the business, we offered some warrants to the people that supported the business before it became a public company. When we did this, this was months before we listed, and also even when we listed, there were a lot of people in the UK that said this model would not work. So we offered the pre-IPO warrants at the time because that's what we needed to do to become a public company. Now the warrants are outstanding, and they become eligible to be exercised at the end of April, so just over a month from now. And what we thought would make sense would be to say to all the warrant holders, would you like to sell your warrants? We'll buy them from you right now at a discount. And that's what we did. And a very small number of the warrant holders said that they'd want to do it, and a lot of the warrant holders said that they absolutely love what we're doing, think Bitcoin's incredibly undervalued, and they haven't got any intention of selling the warrants in the exercising then selling the shares from the warrants in the short term, which was very reassuring actually. I think in answer to your question, we've always or our analytics page presents our fully diluted share capital in that way. So those warrants are already in our MNAV, our Bitcoin per share, our Bitcoin yield, all that stuff. So really what you're doing is you're reducing the number of fully diluted shares. The Bitcoin remains flat, but you're adding a tiny bit of leverage into the company, i.e. the what you're buying the warrants back with. So that's how it reduces or increases the Bitcoin per share, by reducing the fully diluted shares, but slightly increasing the leverage. 0.4% leverage is nothing, even 10%, 20%. You know, if you look at the preferred shares with Strategy and Strive and the way the people are looking at that, you know, they believe, you know, 25, 30% up to 50% amplification is perfectly acceptable, and in my opinion it is. So that's how it works. Another commonly misunderstood point, which will be a very nice surprise starting in about a month for everyone, is with the warrants, because we do factor in the fully diluted nature of the shares in our metrics. The warrants are cash that hasn't been received and therefore deployed into Bitcoin yet. And clearly a lot of it will be deployed into Bitcoin. So, you know, that will increase the Bitcoin per share as we start to deploy that cash into Bitcoin when we receive it. And that's something that people, you know, I don't think anyone's worked that one out yet, because what that means is you've got more cash that can go into Bitcoin. And then at the same time, your fully diluted share capital is not increasing. So, you know, if you look at Capital B is a good example today. They increased their quarter to date yield from a little bit over 0% to a little bit under 1% by deploying that 2.9 million euro into 44 Bitcoin. And, you know, you could see a similar, because that's the same sort of size company as us, you know, you could see a similar sort of Bitcoin yield be generated off the warrant proceeds, assuming they were all exercised, you know, fairly promptly, which I think a lot of them will be. So yeah, like a warrant buyback, you know, the reality is the warrant holders own the warrants. So if they don't want to sell the warrants to us or to anyone else, there's not a great deal you can do about that. But I felt that it was appropriate to make that offer to them, because some of them may have wanted liquidity right now, and that's what we can offer.
Excellent, excellent. And your recent AGM showed strong shareholder support. All resolution passed, and you maintain your Bitcoin holdings steadily. What key message come out from the AGM, and how do you view the company's position in the current environment?
Yeah, so I think on the whole, the shareholders are happy with how we're running the company. I think the shareholders know that it's a tough market for Bitcoin. But as you can see from the votes that we received for the resolutions, you know, we had pretty close to 100% on every single resolution. So that was pleasing to see. In terms of the AGM itself, we had a reasonable number of shareholders attend that. It's always nice to see the shareholders. You know, a lot of shareholders came to our LSE uplisting event, you know, a month and a half ago. So it's always great to see them, because, you know, you can have conversations and you can understand when you're there in person, you know, how people really feel, in addition to what they say. So that was good. We also, we had John and Nick, who run the Squarebird agency that we recently acquired. They were at the AGM, so it was nice for some shareholders to be able to meet them and to see why we believe that's a really important part of the model. You know, having cash flow is important, you know, especially in a harder market. You know, so we were really pleased to, you know, to involve them into the AGM as well. So I think, you know, the reality is most shareholders are probably happy, but maybe a little bit frustrated, but not frustrated with us, frustrated with the wider market. But that's why I'm stressing that I think the Bitcoin price looks very strong at the moment. I think that the macro conditions, more so than the fundamentals of Bitcoin, are the thing that everyone needs to be very, very mindful of in you know, very, very short term.
Yes, I agree with your point. I think that most of the people, especially the ones who entered to the market or the industry last year, the ones who bought Bitcoin for first time last year, or the ones who bought last year shares of Bitcoin treasury companies, are a little bit frustrated, because we all were expecting much more from Bitcoin. But of course, it's not because of the strategy of the companies. The model for me works perfect. The only problem is that we still depend on the macroeconomic conditions, and the macroeconomic conditions are not the best today. But the fundamentals of Bitcoin, to all of us who understand the fundamentals haven't changed. So the only way that Bitcoin has to go is up. And I'm sure that you agree with that because you are a hardcore Bitcoiner like me.
Yeah, 100%. So I keep pretty much 100% of everything that I've got in the world in Bitcoin and Bitcoin treasury companies. And, I'm more confident than I was last year. One of the things that I used to say to people last year, and I need to fact check it so I know whether it's still true. I suspect it's still true, but I haven't actually seen the data to support it. But it was true last year. We used to say to people that there's no one in the world that's ever bought Bitcoin and held it for at least 4 years that's not been in money, i.e. in a profit. So I don't think there's many assets in the world that you can say that offer the upside that Bitcoin offers, that has got that track record. If we look at like silver for a good example, if silver goes down from the level that it's currently at, which is 50% of its recent high, people could be waiting a very, very long time, to be in that profitable position again. And I hope that's not the case because, silver, I'm not a silver investor, but I've been really pleased to see the performance in that because it's been painful for people that believe in precious metals for the last 10 years, whatever. So I really hope that isn't the case. But going back to Bitcoin, I know all of the reasons for Bitcoin, and even if you look at the terrible situation that's happening in the Middle East right now, I saw a news report that suggested the US had spent more in these last couple of weeks than they spent in the last 4 years, in terms of on munitions, compared to Ukraine, another terrible situation. But taking the human side of that out of the discussion, what that tells me is that there's going to be a hell of a lot much more money printing that will be needed, which is terrible for anyone that believes in fiat currencies. Very, very good for anyone that believes in Bitcoin. So there's a lot of things that are creating incredible short-term uncertainty in markets, but in a funny way, without sort of belittling the human impact of these terrible conflicts, makes it incredibly bullish for assets like Bitcoin.
Yes.
And I would suggest probably only Bitcoin, to be fair.
Yes, and of course this is not financial advice, but we are Bitcoiners, and the thing is, what I see now in this big correction, that this is not Bitcoin fault or the industry fault like in 2022, because in 2022 Bitcoin and all the other cryptocurrencies crashed because we had Terra Luna, we had FTX, we had Celsius, we have a lot of things related to the industry. But now what you see, we do every day with Diego a stream in Spanish talking about Bitcoin, talking about AI, talking about treasuries, and we always give good news about Bitcoin. The news that are coming from the Bitcoin industry, we have huge adoption, more treasury companies, more financial companies filing for ETF. But the price is not moving, and I think that this can make people a little bit frustrated. One of the things that we say with Diego is that probably the bottom was 60K. Of course, this is not financial advice. I don't know if you are allowed to answer this question as the CEO of a public company. If you cannot, it's okay. But do you think that the bottom was 60K, or we can see, of course, everything can happen, but for me, the bottom was 60K.
Yeah, so, this is just my personal opinion, but I'll be massively surprised if it goes lower. It is struggling right now, looking at a very, very short time window to get above 70, 74, that sort of a level. But in all honesty, I'm interested in the short-term Bitcoin price because as the CEO of a public company, the short-term Bitcoin price is very, very important. But for me personally, I'm sort of almost uninterested in the short-term Bitcoin price, because I think it's ridiculous where it is. Of course, anything can happen, but I think if Bitcoin was going to be heading below 60K, I think it would have done so, by now, with what we've seen in the world. So, I think that there's a much, much, much greater probability that Bitcoin starts charging back up than it goes, much lower. But that's just my personal opinion. I think that what we're going to see, because I've seen this loads over the last 10 years since I've been investing in Bitcoin, is, whether it's 3 months or 6 months from now, when Bitcoin's 150, 200, whatever, I think there's going to be an awful lot of people saying, I remember when Bitcoin was 70K, why didn't I buy more of it? Or maybe there's going to be a lot of people that are looking at Smarter Web shares saying, I remember when they were 30p, when they were trading at a 20% discount to the underlying assets, which is approximately what we're trading at today. And they say, why didn't I buy more of it? I've had so many people say to me, why didn't I buy more in the IPO, et cetera, et cetera. And, what I say to people is, just be pleased with what you did buy. And it'll be the same. I've seen this story so many times when people look back with hindsight, at these price levels that feel like a bit of a gift. But of course, that's just my personal opinion. We'll have to wait and see.
Yes, probably in 1 year or 2 years, we will say Bitcoin over 200K, something like that. And we will say, remember when Bitcoin was 60K? It happened today. I was thinking about that because for all that are joining now, I mean, I'm not in Hong Kong, I'm in Bangkok. And I've been I haven't come to Bangkok for more than 6 years. And the last time I was in Bangkok, Bitcoin was under 10K in 2019. So I'm not talking about 2005. I'm talking about 2019, 6 years ago, and was under 10K. So if we see the time frame, of course, we cannot be more optimistic about the price of Bitcoin. And also, one of the things that gives me a lot of optimism is that in the last weeks, and especially after the war started, all the stock markets, gold, silver, behave like the shitcoin market, up 5%, down 5%. In the last days, I think that there were wiped out more than 2 or 3 trillion in market cap in precious metals. And Bitcoin resisted. Bitcoin didn't have a strong movement. So this also gives me hope and optimism that this is the bottom. We can see the bottom. Let's see what happens in the next months.
I think there's 2 other things to add to that. So the first one is that, Bitcoin is good at sniffing out when things are going to get better. And, markets on the whole are quite good at that. But, like as we're talking, I've got it on my screen, like oil is pretty much flat at the moment on the day. Oil is telling you that that this terrible situation in Iran is perhaps going to get better fairly soon. If you look at gold and silver, particularly gold, not so much silver because of the industrial uses of silver, and it's obviously that's like your Ethereum to Bitcoin, gold and silver. But if you look at gold, like gold is down 5% today, and significantly off its highs. That's not reacting like it should do in a war. That's really one of the only reasons why people buy gold when everything else in the world goes to shit. But the other big thing that people need to remember, and I very much hope that I never find myself in this position, as somebody that lives in the UK, and this is true for Bitcoin treasury companies as well. If you are a person or a company in the UK and let's say our currency deteriorates significantly, relative to global peers, not only does that mean that your cost of living in that country becomes, quite challenging, i.e. inflation, But you know, that's a real problem if you've worked hard for all of your life and you keep all your assets in that particular currency. You know, look at, you know, yourself, you know, Venezuela, for example, you know, the currency devaluation and the impact that had on everyday people. Look at these poor everyday people in Iran. You know, I saw that they've created something like a million note. I saw that on Twitter this weekend. You know, like if you ignore Bitcoin and its direction that we believe over the years, but look at it on a country level, that's going to be relative to you based on the currency that you keep your assets, live your life, earn your money. You know, and I really hope that that doesn't become a massive thing in the UK. But, you know, dependent on which way the government goes in the future, I think it could be actually sort of something that we need to think about. So, you know, Bitcoin solves that one as well. So yeah, it's a sort of a fascinating and scary if you don't own Bitcoin time in the world at the moment. But for me personally, holding pretty much everything in Bitcoin, it makes me sleep very, very easy at night, whilst ever so slightly sad for those that haven't worked it out yet.
Yes, totally agree on that. And something that we are seeing now that is that people is discovering the value of Bitcoin, because, for example, in Dubai, if you want to sell gold, they pay you 30% less from the market price. The real estate in Dubai dropped 60%. And with Bitcoin, it's because you cannot escape from Dubai and take your apartment with you. You cannot escape and bring the gold with you. But with Bitcoin, you can escape wherever. You can go. I was checking that one of the safest place to be in a war is Argentina. You can go to Argentina with your Bitcoin in your head. So that's something that people, because in the previous big conflicts around the world, we didn't have Bitcoin. So we had gold to save the value, and we didn't have Bitcoin. But now we have Bitcoin, and people is starting to see the value and their potential. Let's move to another topic that I wanted to talk is the strategy world. I love one of the things that I love from the Bitcoin treasury industry is that all of the CEOs are part of the same team. Like you are not competing. I'm part of the same team, and I want to ask you, how was the meeting? How is the situation with the other CEOs? How are the other companies? Any news you want to talk to us?
Yeah, Strategy World was one of the best events that I've been to for a while, and it was such an honor to be invited to talk there alongside some other great companies. You know, Alex from Capital B was there. He was really good, actually. His presentation was awesome. And Metaplanet, you know, and one or two other ones. I think there was 4 of us, international ones, that were invited. But the thing that people probably don't necessarily realize from looking at the content that was produced and the tweets and the coverage online is how much things have changed over the last year. So I was sat around having dinner on, I think it was the Tuesday night, with Saylor and a couple of others, and it was fantastic. Like I think there was 8 or 10 people sat around this table. You know, a few people from strategy, and then, you know, big banks and things, and then the following night, the final night, they organized a dinner with, I think, maybe 40 people, something like that. And a lot of those people wouldn't have been at the event a year ago. You know, you had, I'm just trying to think who's been disclosed publicly. So I think you had Citi, I think Morgan Stanley, Barclays, TD Waterhouse, you know, some really, really big financial institutions that are taking it very, very seriously now. So, you know, if that doesn't give people confidence in Bitcoin as an asset class, then, you know, I'm almost out of ideas of what will. You know, we believe that we're building the future companies of the world that will be the most valuable companies in the world on digital capital, which extends to digital credit, and then other people will build, you know, products that effectively give you digital money. So in addition to people using Bitcoin as a medium of exchange, this layer of digital money that sits on top of digital credit and digital capital, and to do that, we need the major financial institutions to get on board that the Bitcoin network is the thing that we're all building the future on. And they certainly seem to be getting on board. You know, I've seen data over the last few months that suggests that, you know, it's more the retail sort of selling than the institutional selling that's actually, you know, sort of caused this sort of downwards price action that we've seen. I don't know whether that's 100% true, but it seems probable to me. You know, fear and uncertainty in a market affects, you know, people that have got different time correlations and things. And if you think about institutions coming into a market, that takes years and years. So that certainly ties in with me thinking that that data is true. So yeah, Strategy World was amazing. You know, it was great to be invited. We had meetings that have led to numerous other meetings, you know, including when I was in London last week. And yeah, I couldn't be happier with that at the moment. I'd love to be able to say more actually, but I can't.
And since the introduction of the Smarter Web company into the London Stock Exchange, do you see interest in the British financial institution in the treasury company world? Of course, all you can talk, and I don't say that you disclose, but do you see more interest?
Yeah, so I think the best way of answering that is to say that when we first became a public company and we're listed on the Aquis exchange, you know, we did okay on there. It's a great exchange for a small company starting out. You know, I can't speak highly enough of the Aquis exchange as a platform for a small company. Now, the problem that you've got, and I've been very honest, and I've said this to Aquis when we were on there, and you know, in the future, is that you can't really raise institutional capital if you're listed on Aquis, because most of them are not allowed to list in those companies. So the London Stock Exchange gives us that institutional friendly platform, not just friendly, actually, institutional allowable platform. But, you know, just for full transparency, you know, the reality is that we need to see a stronger Bitcoin in order for those conversations that we've been having for many, many months now to start adding value to us. You know, if we look at Bitcoin treasury companies globally, this is all about capital flows. Capital flows need capital structure, which needs you to be listed. You know, we are listed on one of the best exchanges in the world with the London Stock Exchange, and the attitude of the investors, many of which we were speaking to before, is fundamentally different. You know, it's all systems go as far as a lot of them are concerned when Bitcoin looks right. Because at the end of the day, you know, we've got such a big balance sheet that is built on Bitcoin that, you know, those investors, you know, will want Bitcoin to look a bit more certain, you know, and those investors, they're not looking forward, you know, thinking, right, how are we going to get, you know, a 20 or 50% return out of this? They're thinking multi-year, multi iterations of that. So, you know, that's why they don't rush into it. So yeah, I'm pretty optimistic, but you know, I can't tell you exactly when that's going to happen. It might be, as is often the way when we speak, that it's going to happen right now. You know, I suspect that maybe some news has come out of Iran in the last few minutes because Bitcoin's ripping. It's up about 4% now. Oil is down. So maybe it's this afternoon that all starts to happen.
Maybe it's like we need to talk more often if Bitcoin is ripping. while we are talking. Yeah, it's 70, almost 71. Amazing. So probably we should speak more often to make Bitcoin going up. So and one of the things that I have pointed here and I forgot to ask is about the acquisition of Squarebird. How does it impact to the Bitcoin treasury strategy of Smarter Web Company, or was more a move to bring more cash flow and expand your existing business?
Well, it's everything, and it's something that I've clearly communicated to the market since we first became a public company. Our 10-year strategy marks out three things: organic growth, acquisitions, Bitcoin treasury. So acquisitions take time. I'm not going to buy a business that I don't believe in, understand, think is the right price, like the people. All these things are really, really important. And we're working very, very hard at pursuing that. And Squarebird is a great business that fundamentally improves the revenue and therefore the profit of the operating entities now. And it's a great thing. So yeah, it's all part of the plan. Alongside everything else that we're doing. The most important thing to me, other than trying to do the right thing as much as possible, is increasing Bitcoin per share. And then after increasing Bitcoin per share is increasing the total size of the Bitcoin stack. And that's what we're very, very focused on.
Excellent. And talking about the future for the next months, what are the key topics of that Smarter Web Company is going to start developing?
So
under the strategy, the Bitcoin strategy.
Yeah, so obviously we're always looking to improve our Bitcoin per share. As the market improves, which as we just joked about now, might even be this afternoon. We will start taking on more capital, but it's got to be the right capital, the right time, the right structure, the right price, etc. We've got some projects that we're not allowed to talk about, but I've been putting the pressure on the advisors to say, when can we actually start to, say something more about these things? Because we want to do everything with as much transparency as we can. We're full steam ahead on absolutely everything that we're doing. In the not too distant future, we'll announce, probably some new people, because like any growing company, we need more people. We need the right people, good people. There's a lot going on, but as is always the case, frustratingly, you can only say as much as you're allowed to say at any point in time. I'm really looking forward to the end of this week. I'm going to Bedford. Peter McCormack runs an event called Cheat Code. So I'm talking about Bitcoin treasury companies late afternoon, I believe that is. That's with Jack and Freddie. I think we're talking about Bitcoin treasury companies. That'll be a lot of fun. I've actually allocated the whole day to the event so that I can watch all the other speakers, because when I go to good events, I like to try and, sit through the content. It's good to learn, to listen to other people's views. Sometimes you can get some ideas that you can then apply to Bitcoin treasury companies. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that. The rest of this week before then is just meetings. So I've got about another 5 minutes now. And then I've got meetings basically until the evening. And then tomorrow, Wednesday and Thursday morning are the same sort of structure. We've got a couple of other live streams and spaces and things like this to do. But other than that, it's just, online meetings with various different parties that are important, as well as obviously with the team driving stuff forward. So the only promise that I can make to you is that it won't be boring the next few months, but it'll be pretty busy.
Excellent. And one more question about this is, when we spoke last time, I asked you if you were planning to introduce other instruments like the ones that Sailor is doing. and you said no, you are stick to your plan. Having seen the huge success of this kind of instrument like Stretch, are you thinking about the same way you were thinking a few months ago? Or you think that you can incorporate these kind of instruments to smarter web company financing?
Yeah, so I've changed the way that I think about that actually, and you know, we're all human beings, and you know, as facts change, we change our mind. What I previously thought was that you probably needed to have, let's say, 5,000 Bitcoin plus to be able to offer that sort of a product. What I believe now is that we're perfectly sized for that. As long as we get the percentages right, which doesn't really matter whether you've got, you know, 3,000, 5,000, 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 Bitcoin, percentage is a percentage in a way. You know, if you look at our cost basis, we're one of the lowest cost Bitcoin treasury companies out there. If you look at our percentage of our costs versus our revenue, and also obviously the Bitcoin stack. So yeah, I think the only thing that I could say, because obviously I'm only allowed to talk around certain things, is we'll say it's an aspirational goal.
Okay. And to close the conversation, let's talk about a little bit of what's going on in 2 months in Bristol. How is the conference being prepared? What can expect the people who attend?
Yeah, so I think it was last week we published the agenda. I need to tweak the agenda ever so slightly because I might have put a little bit too much into it. So I might need to sort of reduce everyone's times by 2 minutes or something just to allow a changeover, because I've probably crammed in a bit too much. But other than the slight timing issue, I think that the content in terms of structure and speakers and all of that is going to be great. I think this week we'll announce another sponsor. So we're really grateful to the people that have sponsored it, in addition to the speakers that have said they'll give up their time. Ticket sales are going reasonably well, actually. We've got some VIP tickets left still. So if anyone wants to go and they want to do the VIP ticket, you know, probably a good idea to buy that ticket sooner rather than later. Alex and Laura have worked, you know, we've ordered, you know, the drapes, they've sent the branding for the digital screens and things like that over to the venue. I haven't picked the menu yet for the lunch and the VIP dinner. I like to get involved in all the detail, especially those bits. So yeah, I'm hoping that it's going to be a great event that we're bringing to the UK. I'm very much looking forward to it. So I actually spent a couple of days last week with Jesse in London. He's back in the States now, and on Wednesday I did a little test of showing some of the sites of Bristol and Bath, which hopefully, if your schedule allows, we can use that format for when we spend some time together the day before or the day after, dependent on how diaries work. So yeah, it should be a good event. You know, it's something that's good for Bitcoin. It's good for Bitcoin treasury companies. It's good for the UK. The Smarter Web is just hosting it, and yeah, I'm looking forward to that event.
Excellent. So, well, next time probably we speak will be in Bristol. So we need to do a podcast with you showing me around your city, as the same as I did in Hong Kong.
Yeah, 100%. So, you know, we'll work out whether it's better for you for the day before or the day after. But you know, I'll fit in with you, and I think that'd be really cool. We'll do it in Bristol and Bath because, as I said in my weekly update, which we published on Saturday, Bath is really cool because you've got the Romans, you know, who built a lot of that, you know, what is now a city. And they are the first society, as far as I'm aware, that introduced inflation. They also introduced insurance, but yeah, they introduced inflation by clipping their coins, and then also changing the metals content in it. A bit like, you know, people don't realize this, but it was only something like 50 years ago, approximately, that the US actually, you know, removed gold from their dollars, you know, i.e. the gold standard. Only 50 years ago, you know, and, you know, I think something like 30% of Americans believe today that $1 is backed with $1 of gold as well. So, you know, things have changed a lot. But yeah, going to see the Roman stuff in Bath will take us back 2,000 years, and we can see where the problem started. And also, one thing that I would leave you with is when you look at inflation, you know, the sort of the devaluing of currencies, that's typically, without wanting to scare anyone, that's typically before an empire collapses. You know, so, you know, hopefully we're not seeing that, but, you know, at least we can all plan ahead for what might be an uncertain future. But human beings always adapt. It's just, you know, that transfer of wealth from different people in societies, you know, sort of, you know, and Bitcoin fixes that as well.
That's the point. That's I see that we are witnessing the collapse of the empire, the collapse of the dollar, and we have the good thing is that we have a solution. We got an insurance on that is Bitcoin. And again, no financial advice, but if you go to Bitcoin, you will succeed. So I didn't know that the inflation was invented in the UK.
Well, it's invented by the Romans.
Well, but
yeah, and the Roman Empire spanned pretty wide, actually, including over to, you know, the sort of parts of the UK, including Bath, which is where they built the Roman baths, which, you know, still stands to this day. So yeah, the Romans were ahead of their time. You know, if you ever get a chance to go to Rome, you know, it's a fantastic city. There's so much great history there, and you know, when you walk around it, or in this case, Bath, you know, it puts it into perspective. You know, a lot of these problems that we're dealing with, you know, have been around for a very, very long time. You know, and inflation is, you know, ultimately, you know, a currency is the government's collateral, isn't it? And the government, you know, historically do terrible, terrible things, and that never changes. You know, the people that run these things, you know, the politicians, you know, they've got a lot to answer for, really. But you know, what we can do as individuals or as CEOs or, you know, whatever, is at least we can try and make our own little change to the world, you know.
Excellent. A great way to close this conversation. Andrew, thank you very much for your time. Sorry to you and to all the audience for making you wait, but at least we can go live on YouTube. Of course, this episode, I will do some edition and I will re-upload on YouTube with better audio and will be up in a few days, but the live stream will be in YouTube. So everyone who didn't have the time to watch live, they will be able to watch because it's going to be on YouTube. Anything else you want to add, and how people can contact you?
So if you visit our website, which is smarterwebcompany.co.uk, or find us on X, smarterwebuk, or me, ASJ Webley. You know, if you've got any questions, let us know. Yeah, that's probably the best way of getting in touch with us.
Excellent, Andrew. Thank you very much again for your time. You know that our channel is always open to you. You just have to send me a WhatsApp. And if we don't speak before, we see you. I will see you in Bristol.
See you soon, yeah.
Thank you very much. And thank you to everyone who is on the other side. If you like the episode, give us a like, subscribe to our channel, follow us on social media, because doing so, you help us a lot in painting the world orange. See you in the next episode. Stay humble, stack sats, and remember,